Hello everyone. So my topic is inflation. Inflation refers to the rise in the price of most goods and services of daily or common use, such as food, clothing, housing, recreation, transport, consumer staples, etc. Inflation measures the average price change in a basket of commodities and services over time. The opposite and rare fall in the price index of basket of items is called deflation. Inflation is indicative of decrease in the purchasing power of a unit of a country's currency. This is measured in percentage. So in the next slide we can see about the main causes of inflation in India. There are two main causes of inflation. The first one is demand pull inflation. The most common is demand pull inflation. That's when demand outpaces supply for goods and services. Buyers want the product so much that they are willing to pay higher prices. The second one is cost push inflation. It is less common cause. That's when supply is restricted but demand is not. Next, we can see about the types of inflation. So, the first one is creeping or mild inflation. It is when prices rise 3% a year or less. That's because this mild inflation sets expectations that prices will continue to rise. As a result, it sparks increased demand as consumers decide to buy now before prices rise in future. And the second one is walking inflation. This type of strong or pernicious inflation is between 3 to 10 percentage a year. People start to buy more than they need just to avoid tomorrow's much higher prices. This derives demand even further so that suppliers can't keep up. More important, neither can wages. As a result, common goods and services are priced out of the reach of most important people. The third one is galloping inflation. When inflation rises to 10% or greater, it wreaks absolute havoc on the economy. Money loses value so fast that business and employee income can't keep up with the cost and prices. Fourth one is hyperinflation. It is when the prices skyrocket more than 50% a month. It is fortunately very rare. In fact, most examples of hyperinflation have occurred when the government printed money recklessly to pay for war. Next is stagflation. It is just like its name. That is when economic growth is stagnant but there is still price inflation. Then it comes core inflation. The core inflation rate measures rising prices in everything except food and energy. That's because gas prices tend to escalate every summer, usually driving up the price of food and often anything else that has large transportation costs. Inflation can be classified on the basis of time into wartime inflation, post-war inflation, and peacetime inflation. On the basis of inducement, inflation can be classified into the following. The wage inflation is when workers' pay rises faster than the cost of living. This occurs when there is a shortage of workers, when labor unions negotiate ever higher wages, or when workers effectively control their own pay. Of course, everyone thinks that their wages increases as justified. However, higher wages can cause prices of the company's goods and services to rise. Next one is profit induced inflation. If the producers due to their monopoly position tend to mark up their profit margin, it will lead to profit induced inflation. Higher profit raises the cost of production, which in turn pushes up the prices. Next one is deficit induced inflation. When a government covers the deficit in its budget through creating new money. The purchasing power of community increases without simultaneously increase in production. This leads to a rise in the price level, which is referred as a deficit induced inflation. The fourth one is currency induced inflation. This is due to the expansion of printed money. Next is credit induced inflation. This is due to the expansion of bank credit. Then comes foreign trade induced inflation. When a country experiences a sudden rise in the demand for its exportable against inelastic supply of exportable in the domestic market, this increases the demand and price level at home. Trade gains and sudden inflow of exchange remittances increases the demand and the prices in the domestic market. Both these factors lead to foreign trade induced inflation. Sectoral inflation. Inflation which is restricted to a particular sector in the economy. On the basis of scope, inflation can be classified into comprehensive inflation and sporadic inflation. Comprehensive inflation. When the prices of all goods and services increase throughout the economy, it is the case of comprehensive inflation. This leads to a rise in the general price level. Next one is sporadic inflation. Sporadic inflation is a sectoral inflation since instead of affecting whole economy, it affects a few sectors. In this case, the prices of these goods increase due to the certain physical bottlenecks which adversely affect the production of these goods. On the next slide, we can see about the effects of inflation. The purchasing power of a currency unit decreases as the commodities and services get dearer. This also impacts the cost of living in a country. When inflation is high, the cost of living gets higher as well, which ultimately leads to a deceleration in the economic growth. A certain level of inflation is required in the economy to ensure that expenditure is promoted and hoarding money through savings is demotivated. Now we can see who measures inflation in India. Inflation is measured by a central government authority, which is in the charge of adopting measures to ensure the smooth running of the economy. In India, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation measures inflation. Is inflation bad for everyone? Inflation is perceived differently by everyone depending upon the kind of assets they possess. For someone with investment is real estate or stocked commodity. Inflation means that the prices of their assets is set for a hike. For those who possess cash, they may be adversely affected by inflation as the value of their cash erodes. Thank you.